The Anthem AVM70 versus the Anthem AVM90. Is the 90 worth almost twice the price of the 70? You guys are not going to like this video. I could see it all now. The comment section, people are not going to like this. They're not going to like it. So here's the thing. The AVM70 and the AVM90 are both 15-channel processors. So that means neither of them have internal amplification. You are reliant on external amplification for all channels. They're similar in that they're both 15-channel, but the big difference is that the AVM90 has four independent subwoofer outs, whereas the AVM70 has two independent sub outs. The other big difference is that the cost. At the time of making this video, the AVM70 retails for $39.99 and the AVM90 retails for $74.99. So yeah, almost twice the price for the AVM90. So the big question is the AVM90 worth that extra cost? Now, I've wondered about this for a while. Now, I need to say right now, right here, right now, this is absolutely not a sponsored video. I own the AVM70 because I purchased the AVM70. And I do not own an AVM90. However, a friend of mine, local to me here, did purchase the AVM90. And they messaged me and they said, hey, would you like to try out the AVM90 and compare it to the AVM70? And I said, absolutely. I am very interested in doing that because I've owned the AVM70 for a couple of years now. And that's always kind of in the back of my mind. It's like, I got the 70, but should I have gotten the 90? Like, should I have, stepped up and paid the extra money to get that higher model, right? Like, should I have done that? Am I missing out on something because I got the 70 instead of the 90? That's always been in the back of my mind. So up until my friend loaning me the 90, I literally have never heard an AVM90 before. I've only ever heard the 70. And so, of course, I was absolutely interested in trying it out. So first of all, what did I do for testing purposes? And two, what did I see, or rather, what did I hear? So I hooked it all up. Now, for all of you that don't know, I have had on loan from Trinov the Trinov Altitude 16 paired up with the Trinov Amplitude 16 here in my theater. So what I did was I disconnected the Altitude 16 and I connected up the AVM70 to the Amplitude 16 amplifier. The Amplitude 16 is a 16-channel amplifier, so it can drive all of the speakers here in my 9.2.4 Atmos theater. So for testing purposes, what I did was I tested the AVM70 paired with the Trinov Amplitude 16, but then I also paired the AVM90 with the Trinov Amplitude 16. That way it was apples to apples. There was no difference in amplification. It was all just the same across the board. The only difference was one test was with the 70, one test was with the 90. So it took quite a bit. Like it was a lot to unhook everything and connect up everything to the 70 and then run some tests and listen to it and then switch over to the 90. And then anyways, and then it was a whole thing. So I did that myself and see, here's the thing. Like you guys, you're going to love, no, you're not going to love this. You're going to hate this. So I listened to a lot of content on the 70 and then I switched over to the 90 and there was about a 5-minute gap. It took me about 5 minutes to reroute all the cables and switch everything over. So there's about a 5-minute gap. And then I went back and I listened to the same content with the 90 and I couldn't really hear a difference. It was indistinguishable. Now I was expecting to hear a big difference and I was fully prepared to attribute it to placebo effect because obviously I know which is which, right? But instead I'm listening and I'm straining to hear a difference. I'm straining. I couldn't hear a difference. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, you know what? I need to get somebody else involved and I need to do a blind A/B test. So I switched back to the 70. I brought my wife down here, set her right here in the main listening position. Now, here's something else to know. In previous tests, specifically, this was a long time ago. This was way back at the beginning of last year. I did some tests where we tested if you could see and hear the difference between disc versus streaming. And my wife, her ear, she was able to hear the difference right away and with almost pure certainty. She was like, oh yeah, absolutely. That's the disc. That's the disc. Like we did like 4 or 5 demo tracks to test it. And she was able to distinguish very clearly and with, like I said, with near certainty, that which one was the disc versus the streaming. So she has a very good ear. I would say she has a better ear than me. She is able to hear things that I'm not able to hear. So my intention in bringing her down here was, okay, I couldn't really hear a difference. I want to hear, or I want to find out if she can hear a difference. So I brought her down here and I played her 5 songs and 2 demo clips from movies. I played her a few songs. One of my go-to songs is Circles Around This Town by Maren Morris. And one of the things that song really highlights, it's a really good way to stress test a system, because if a system isn't tuned correctly, or anything's out of whack, or you have poor quality speakers, or any number of things can cause this. If you have sibilance in your system, which is that kind of harsh, high frequency, kind of really hurts the ears, 2,000 to 4,000 kilohertz range frequencies, this song will highlight those. And so I did not really hear any sibilance from the AVM70 or the 90. They both sounded really good. I would say it was kind of pushing right up against the edge, but it didn't cross over the line. So that was one of the songs. And then I threw in some other songs, and then I played the Dune 2 clip, the famous Dune 2 clip that's kind of the new Ready Player One. And then I played a clip from Deepwater Horizon, the one where Mark Wahlberg is kind of climbing out from underneath the rubble and everything is just chaotic all around him. So it was quite a bit of material. I mean, it was probably 20 to 25 minutes worth of material that I played for her on the 70. And then I stopped that, and then I'm like, okay, give me a moment. And so I went in and I very quickly, like I said, it took about 5 minutes, and then I switched over to the 90, came back. She had no idea which one was which. It truly was a blind test. Then I played the exact same content in the same order, nothing deviating, everything the same. I played it all for her. And at the end, I'm like, okay, so which one sounded better? And she was like, I couldn't really hear a difference. She had the exact same reaction I did. She couldn't hear the difference. Now here's the thing. What we have in the documentation, the best I've been able to determine, is that there are 2 main differences between the 70 and the 90, other than the significant price difference. The first difference is that the AVM70 has 2 independent subwoofer outs, and the AVM90 has 4 independent subwoofer outs. I only have 2 subwoofers in my theater, so that canceled that out because we were listening to the same on both systems, 2 subwoofers with both systems. So that leaves just purely the sound quality coming from the speakers, not really taking into account the subwoofers. And so the other big difference that we have in the documentation and the specs and everything is that apparently the DACs, the digital to analog converters in the AVM90, are of a higher quality than the DACs in the AVM70. And everything I've read has indicated that where you hear the biggest difference between the two is in music, when you're listening to music. And so that's why I played 5 songs in this test. I listened to 5 demo tracks, and I couldn't hear the difference. Now maybe there is a massive difference, and my ear just is not trained, or it's not sensitive enough, or whatever. And then my wife is the same way. Her ears just can't hear the difference. We just don't have a finely tuned enough palate, I guess, for our ears. I don't know. Or it could be that the difference in DACs between the two models, the human ear, most human ears, generally speaking, are not able to distinguish the difference. That is very possible. I would be very interested to increase the sample size, get 10 people to do an A/B test and get 10 people to see if we have a better than 50-50 shot of choosing which one sounds better. Because, this is only 2 data points, but it was interesting to me because the big question is the AVM90 worth twice the price of the AVM70? And I would say for me personally and for my wife, the answer, if I have 2 subs, if I only have 2 subs, then I would say the answer is no. You're better off just getting the AVM70. So that brings us to the point of the sub difference, right? If you have 4 subs, now the thing about Anthem is they have the Anthem room correction, Arc Genesis, this room correction software that runs on their processors and their receivers. And it does an extremely good job of aligning your subwoofers and really getting the best and most performance out of your subs. And so to be able to independently align and tune 4 subwoofers, that is a pretty big advantage. So I would say if that's something that is really important to you, then yeah, maybe the AVM90 would be worth stepping up to. Or if you're technical and you have the skills, you could, go with the AVM70 and just connect a mini DSP and tune your subs and, connect them up and tune them that way. That's an option. But if you just want an all-in-one box that just does it all, then the AVM90 might be the way to go. And if it's within your budget. But all in all, this was extremely interesting to me because, like I say, for the last couple of years, I've been hearing, this debate, as to which one is better or not. Well, everybody accepts that the AVM90 is better, right? It better be because it's twice the price. But the question is it better enough to warrant the extra price? And so I've always wanted to hear them so that I could kind of make up my mind and kind of put my mind at ease that I wasn't missing out on something by going with the 70 instead of the 90. And with 2 subs, I gotta say, I think the AVM70 does everything. Like honestly, back to back, I just could not hear a difference. They were indistinguishable from each other. Now, I know there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to like that. And that's cool. That's fine. That's A-okay. You can absolutely have a different opinion. And I guarantee that there are people watching this video who have also listened to the AVM70 versus the AVM90, and they might share a difference of opinion. That's okay too. I'm sure I'll hear from you in the comments. And that's okay too. It's just very interesting, and I'm glad that I had this opportunity to test out the 90. And thank you to my friend Paul for loaning me the 90 for a few days so that I could test it out and experience it here in my home theater. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for watching.